Viongozi wa mrengo wa Azimio wakiongozwa na Kalonzo Musyoka kwa sasa wanatoa taarifa kuhusiana na matukio yanayoendelea humu nchini. Tusikilize wanayosema.
Having the central committee meetings going on, and Mwangi wa area as well, Governor Mwangi wa area. So this is a collective Azimio statement, and I need to say I mentioned this to our team leader. As you know, I think it's now clear that Mheshimiwa Raila Odinga remains our team leader until after the elections in 2025. And this should put to rest then some of the concerns expressed countrywide about his recent tour of Mukuru with us in Azimio, and the remarks that are made, which are in line with the proper running of opposition politics. I'll deal with first the raging floods, being a national disaster. The Azimio La Umoja One Kenya coalition is deeply concerned about the serious disruptions the heavy rains continue to cause in the country. In the last few days, the country has witnessed heavy rainfall with widespread destructive floods on our dear citizens, materials, the economy, indeed the environment. The floods have affected most parts of the country. Azimio expresses its sadness about the increasing number of casualties of the raging floods. A media report indicates that there are over 238 people dead, 300,000 households displaced, and still 75 people missing. 150 schools are also directly affected. Residential buildings are collapsing, like the one going on in Uthiru. Farms submerged. 178 dams and reservoirs bursting their capacities, and several people at risk of contracting waterborne diseases. I wouldn't even say several people at the risk, a lot of people. That the Delta region, for example, because the River Tana, as you know, down from up on the Seven Forks dams, a lot of them have reached capacity in the River Tana, then continues to overflow, causing damage, as you may have seen in Garissa. People have to use boats to move from Mandogo area to cross into Garissa. A great risk, and we haven't even seen this regime trying to do anything there to alleviate the situation. The situation becomes more difficult even downstream as the river races towards the coast. I mean, where Kipini area, where the River Tana joins the Indian Ocean. This is devastating, and we sincerely send our deepest sympathies to the families and communities affected. As a coalition, we continue to mobilize resources to help in the mitigation of some of the adverse effects on livelihoods. On Thursday and Friday last week, we visited Mumbuni Primary School in Machakos County and Kwaruben Secondary School in Nairobi, where we donated essential items to more than 2,000 affected households. We ask the public to join us as we help our fellow Kenyans. We also take this opportunity today to commend the Red Cross, who have, from the onset of the raging floods, helped to save countless lives. We have watched them use all means available, including boats, choppers, and other equipment to rescue stranded Kenyans in all parts of the country. Without their effort, this would have been an even worse disaster. It is not lost to us that today, May the 8th, is World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day. We celebrate you. Kenyans can recall that last year, the Kenya Meteorological Director, Mr. Gikungu, issued an early warning about the expected heavy rains that could lead to catastrophic flooding in the country. This was a scientific and expert opinion confirming the impending El Nino rains. Unfortunately, his advice was immediately disregarded by the Kenya Kwanza regime, and Mr. Gikungu was made to apologize actually publicly in a press conference in the presence of Deputy President for allegedly miscommunicating and contradicting the President. It is now turning out that it is President Ruto and his regime that misled the country with regard to El Nino. He has recently admitted that the meteorological reports paint a dire picture, quote unquote. This is coming too late in the day from a regime that is in itself a disaster. While it is a constitutional obligation of the national government to address disaster management under the fourth schedule of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, we note the Kenya Kwanza regime has failed to adequately respond to the devastating floods. This is a sign of an incompetent government with no regard for its citizens. With all the widespread disruptions witnessed, the Kenya Kwanza regime is reluctant to declare the floods a national disaster so that it can get the adequate response needed. We are aware that such a declaration will automatically call for the expenditure from the country's contingency fund. Could it be that there is no money in the contingency fund? If no money, who has expended the money and on what? Kenyans want to know. We also note that President Ruto recently announced in Mathare that the households affected by the floods will each receive 10,000 shillings with 1 billion already set aside. Again, this is a case of too little, too little, too late. For the families who have lost everything, such allocations are too little to start afresh. We demand that the government increase the financial support to at least 100,000 shillings per family and immediately launch an emergency aid appeal for all the flood victims in Kenya. Red Cross projects that the flood situation could need at least 7 billion shillings. We demand that the government immediately deploys all the necessary responses for mitigating the impact of the flooding on affected communities, including the provision of assistance to the bereaved families and the internally displaced. We know that the regime is forcefully evicting people from the areas perceived to be flood-prone and riparian land. And such evacuations, whether mandatory or voluntary, must be done in a humane manner that respects human rights without causing further deaths. The reckless and reactionary strategy of the Kenya Kwanza regime has caused the death of a young boy by the name Ian Otieno. Ian was killed yesterday when the government bulldozers forcefully evicted those living in Mathare. Almost a day or so after President Ruto had been there and telling everybody that you will not be moved until at least some adequate alternative shelter has been found. On Saturday, 2 Kenyans also lost their lives in similar circumstances in Mukuru slums. These actions of a disastrous regime must stop. In light of the current tragedy, we demand that this regime adopt protective measures of early warnings and facilitation relocation of communities in imminent risk of being affected by the floods and adhere to effective disaster management strategies. Azimio also insists that the Kenya Kwanza regime provides emergency relief services, including food, shelter, and medical care to meet the basic needs of all the displaced, evicted, and affected populations. B, deliver assistance in rebuilding homes and infrastructure destroyed by the floods with an emphasis on sustainable development and disaster-resilient construction. C, develop and strengthen infrastructure and systems that enhance the country's resilience to natural disasters and facilitate effective response mechanisms. And D, fast-track policies and legislative frameworks that focus on comprehensive disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation measures and ensure active community involvement in these processes. Number two, the doctor strike is another disaster. Azimio expresses concerns over the 2 months of doctor strike that has disrupted healthcare services in the country. This is another disaster that has been occasioned by disastrous.
Naam, huyo ni kiongozi wa Wiper ambaye ni mmoja kati ya wanasiasa wa mrengo wa Azimio